song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Is won. Is won.
Thank you, Eagle Staff Middle School of Seattle, for that beautiful rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing. Hello and welcome to all of you. I'm Lanisha DiBartolavin, President and CEO of your Northwest African American Museum. And we're so delighted to have you tune in today. Happy Grandparents' Day to all grandparents who are viewing. As we begin, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish people. We also honor the Coast Salish people of this region. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral lands of a people who are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. We also are grateful for our African ancestors who survived the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, who endured the violence of slavery and the indignity of racial oppression, who had the courage to pack up and head north and west to the Northwest, who blazed trails for us to be here and to be ourselves here. Thank you for tuning in on this special virtual Grandparents' Day. We are delighted to partner with Elliott Bay Book Company and AARP for today's talk. There is an African proverb that says, the youth can go faster, but the elders know the road. And there is so much significance to the role of elders in our families, in our communities, in our culture. They truly know the road. So today we salute grandparents and great-grandparents. We honor them for knowing the road and sharing the wisdom with us all. We are grateful, so grateful to have in partnership today with Elliott Bay Book Company and AARP, two authors who tell amazing, important stories about grandparents, about our culture, about our future. And we look forward to hearing from Dr. Jewell Parker Rhodes in conversation with Brandy Colbert today. But as we begin this conversation, we would like for you all to just think about an elder in your life who has poured into you, who has helped to shape your identity, helped to shape your sense of integrity, helped to give you a legacy in which to walk. And today, thank them. Thank them for the light that they shed on the path that you travel, because today is all about grandparents. And we're fortunate on this Grandparents' Day, again, to feature a conversation with Dr. Jewell Parker Rhodes about her new novel that highlights a bit the role of a grandmother. Dr. Jewell Parker Rhodes is the author of numerous novels, as well as a memoir called Porch Stories, A Grandmother's Guide to Happiness. She is the author of several books for youth, including the New York Times bestseller Ghost Boys and award-winning Black Brother, Black Brother. She has won the American Book Award, the Black Caucus Award of the American Library Association for Literary Excellence, and the Jane Addams Peace Association Book Award. She is the founding artistic director and Piper Endowed Chair at the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing at Arizona State University. Dr. Rhodes is with us tonight to talk about her newest book, Paradise on Fire. It's a captivating tale exploring issues of race, class, and climate change. It debuts on Tuesday, and you can purchase your copy from Elliott Bay Book Company. And Dr. Rhodes will be in conversation today with Brandy Colbert. Ms. Colbert's new book called Blackbirds in the Sky comes out on October 5th, and you can pre-order from Elliott Bay Book Company. Brandy Colbert is the critically acclaimed author of the novels Point, The Voting Booth, Finding Yvonne, The Revolution of Bertie Randolph, The Only Black Girls in Town, and the Stonewall Award winner Little and Lion. A trained journalist, she also worked with ballet dancer Misty Copeland to adapt her memoir into the best-selling book, Life in Motion, Young Readers Edition. Born and raised in Springfield, Missouri, Ms. Colbert now lives and writes in Los Angeles and is on the faculty at Hamline University's Master of Fine Arts program for writing for children and young adults. We are thrilled to now hear Jewell Parker Rhodes and Brandy Colbert. Brandy?
Thank you so much, Lanisha, for that wonderful introduction. We're so happy to be here today, so thank you for having us. Hello, Jewell.
Hi, Brandy. How are you?
I'm great. It's such a joy to be able to do this and help celebrate and help launch your beautiful book. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And Lanisha, that was a wonderful opening. And I thank you for that. And I'm a grandparent. I'm an elder. Brandy is a long way from being a grandparent, but Brandy and I actually asked if we could start with one of the things, and we have many things, but start with one of the things that we have in common. And that is that Brandy and I both have written about the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. Now, going way back in time to 1998, I published a book called Magic City, because Tulsa was known as the Magic City. And it was the first novel ever written about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And it's really interesting that for all these years, 100 years, it's been sort of under the radar. We haven't known about the massacre, but now Brandy has written a new book called Blackbirds in the Sky that's coming out in October. That's a nonfiction youth version about the Tulsa Race Massacre. So I'm going to read you a little bit from Magic City. Brandy's going to read you a little bit from Blackbirds, and we're going to talk about the race massacre, because how could you not, especially for an African American museum event? So here's the beginning of my novel. Joe Samuels had decided to quit dreaming, decided to stop dreaming of leaving Tulsa, of discovering new horizons streaked with magic. Yet here he was, lying by the tracks, his head to the ground, listening to the rumblings of the 945 preparing to leave, trailing Pullman cars and flat cars loaded with cotton and crude. Weary, disoriented, Joe needed sleep. He wanted to ride the rails over the Rockies to the Pacific in a sleeper car, cozy, dreamless in an upper bunk. He didn't want to dream of dying. 3 nights in a row, he'd had the same dream, a dream that he sensed was something more than a dream, a haunting, a premonition, an evil worked by the devil. So my novel begins with Joe dreaming of fire, which connects to my latest book, Paradise on Fire, but he's also dreaming that he's going to be lynched and that his hometown is going to burn to the ground. And that premonition comes true, except for his lynching. Brandy.
Thank you so much for reading that. So I'm just going to read a bit from one of the chapters where the Tulsa Race Massacre actually begins. So this is shortly after a black mob went, or not a black mob, but a black group of men went down to confront the white mob that was at the courthouse, who were threatening to lynch Dick Rowland, who had been accused of assaulting a young white woman. And so this is talking about how sort of things got started that night. The tone had been set. Members of the white mob, without government-issued firearms, began looting stores and pawn shops for guns and ammunition. According to one report, a Tulsa police officer handed out guns stolen from a sporting goods store across from police headquarters. Black people who had happened to be downtown that evening were some of the first victims of the mob. They were shot on sight. A teenager named William Chalk Phillips, who would grow up to become a Tulsa police officer, witnessed the violence at the Royal Theater that evening. A Black man who had been chased by the white mob burst into the theater looking for a place to hide, and accidentally ended up on stage in front of the film that was playing. One of the men from the mob saw him and yelled, "There he is, heading for the aisle," Phillips recalled. As he finished the sentence, a roaring blast from a shotgun dropped the Negro man by the end of the orchestra pit. Although a smaller crowd had returned to the courthouse amid all the chaos, demanding, "Bring the rope" and "Get him," their cries were not backed up by force. This was no longer about Dick Rowland and his alleged crime. War had been declared on any and every Black person in Tulsa.
Wow, powerful, Brandy. In my novel, Dick Rowland actually is my character, Joe. And I try to stay close to the facts of the story, but I'm really interested in why you, Brandy, decided to write this book on the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Why do you think it was, well, why did you do it, Brandy?
Yeah, so I had sort of been digging into nonfiction, a little bit. I had adapted, Misty Copeland's memoir, like was mentioned in my bio. And then I had also sort of integrated some fiction or nonfiction into my fiction as well. And had just finished adapting another adult edition of a book for young readers about Rosa Parks. And so I'm starting to think about all this history and all this history that's new. The Rosa Parks book was really a revelation to me, and I'm sure anyone who reads it, because all we know about her is that, she sat down on a bus and, resisted, right? And nobody really knows anything about her. And it was just fascinating to read about her life. And it's not like it ended there. She went on to have a very full life of activism up in Detroit. So I started getting interested in some of these things, like why hadn't I heard of some of these people and why were they not in my textbooks? And, I think a lot of people are starting to understand that the education they've gotten may not have been as complete as it could have been, especially when it comes to Black Americans in history. And so after watching, I'd heard a little bit about the Tulsa Race Massacre before, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, just like a little bit. And it's only 3 hours from where I grew up in Missouri. So I was wondering how I had never heard of it, especially. And then watching the HBO show Watchmen that came out in late 2019. They showed the first opening scene is, during the Tulsa Race Massacre. It's like a flashback to that. I just thought, well, this is really interesting, like all of this stuff in the show, from the flashbacks actually happened. So while I love novels and I love, reading them, I also do come from a journalism background and had been wanting to kind of just strike out and do a nonfiction project on my own that wasn't an adaptation of someone else's work for younger readers. And so from there, I just, went on and wrote a proposal, and now I have a book.
And it's a marvelous, marvelous book. And I've got to just contrast how you came to know about it. I was actually in 1995 reading the Sunday paper, and there was an article that showed this picture of a community that was just like devastated. It was like there had been a World War III. And then it had the headline, "The only US city bombed from the air." And it was bombed from the air. And then it told about how Dick Rowland had been accused of assaulting a white woman, and how that started, his arrest. And then the Black community coming together to say you can't lynch him without his, due process, and then the spark of this massacre. But I was like the same as you. How come I didn't know this history? But interestingly enough, when I published my book, I got lots of hate mail. I got letters from the KKK. People who reviewed my book got letters from the KKK. And the Tulsa World, which is the major newspaper of Oklahoma, they sent someone to interview me and do a review of the book. And they said that this was fabulous. I should get the Pulitzer Prize, but they never, ever, ever published it, any of it.
Oh, wow.
And when I later met the Book World editor in like 3 years afterwards, she says, oh, it's nothing personal. So I grew up, in terms of working on this book in the context of people still didn't want to hear it, and that they were still calling it a lie. And it seems to me now we're finally getting to that moment where your book will be embraced because we're ready to deal with the trauma. Why do you think it's taken so long?
Gosh, I think, it's so much shame. And that is really fascinating and also horrifying to hear that you had that experience. And I'm so sorry. But yeah, you would think in the 90s it would be a little bit more evolved, right? But, even then, it felt like people were still having a lot of problems. They didn't even form that commission to sort of study it, right, until the end of that decade. So, I think a lot of shame from people. And also some people may also be scared that history will repeat itself. But I think it's just sort of this myth, I talk about this a little bit at the end of the book, but this myth of American exceptionalism, as if, we're not allowed to actually talk about the bad things that happened and, some of the terrible ways this country was built, and also love it. Both of these things can be true. You can love where you live and also be critical of its problems.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that, or they think, well, if you criticize something, that just means you hate it and you're not, giving it any grace. And it's like, no, like we can do both. So yeah, I think it's a combination of many things. And now people, right, are really beginning to push back and say, look, that's not okay. We need to learn our history because so much of it circles back to where we are today directly.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to hear you talk about you can criticize what you love. You can criticize, your America and also love it, because that was something that I told my children from a very young age, that we have an obligation to criticize to make our nation more perfect, or not more perfect, move more towards perfection. That if we don't criticize, then that means everything's fine. But we're not. We're an imperfect people trying to make a more perfect union, and we still haven't quite gotten there. One of the things that I did want to point out in honor of the 100th anniversary, which happened this past May for the Tulsa Race Massacre, is that they had just now located what they think are some of the grave sites of the murdered. That they estimated anywhere from 300, and some people say as many as 1,000, Black people were murdered and just buried or thrown in the river. And I just think to myself, that you don't have the recognition still of them as being human beings, but the pathologists on these 13 graves that they uncovered in coffins, they have confirmed that these are bodies that are from that time period that would have most likely have been victims of the Tulsa Race Massacre. But there's still a whole lot of work that needs to be done. Yes.
Yeah.
And one last thing before we transition, I also want to say that when I went back to Tulsa for the paperback of Magic City, Timothy McVeigh, who bombed the Oklahoma court, federal building, he was being sentenced, to death for that crime. And I was very much struck this year when Magic City was reissued in honor of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, that we were now pursuing another white insurrection of the January 6th. So each time that Magic City has come out, I've been witness to a nation saying that somebody who did something against white institutions, and they were white, there was swift justice, or swift attempt at justice. And yet for African American peoples, dating back to slavery, dating back to the 100 years of the Tulsa Massacre, people are still aching and yearning for justice. So the white master narrative being expedient when, white foundations are attacked, but not being so expedient when people of color are attacked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really tragic. And, the fact that you have those two moments particularly like built around your book is just, it's upsetting.
Crazy.
But thank you for writing this book. I have a copy too. I'm excited to read it. I kind of had to take a
so
break
remember these
after.
two books, folks.
Yes.
It's coming out in October, and mine was written at a time as a second novel when nobody wanted to hear about it. So we represent progress. Yeah,
Yes,
and across
absolutely.
the generations, telling the tale and keeping it alive. With our our storytelling tradition as Black women. Whew.
Oh. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about that. And now, if we may, I want to talk about your wonderful new book that comes out on Tuesday, Paradise on Fire. Love this cover.
Oh, I love the cover too. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, just this beautiful young Black girl. And it's about Addie, and her real full name is Adago, which in Nigerian means daughter of the eagle. And they call her Addie. And somebody wrote in a review that Black people aren't generally in the survivor tales, even though as a culture we have survived, and it's sort of like, but if you think about a lot of our culture, we have survival tales that are young white men. Well, here Addie is my heroine, and not only does she survive, but she also thrives. So I love Addie.
I love Addie too. I have a lot of questions for you about Addie and her world, but did you want to read just a little bit for us?
I'm just going to read, a little bit of the beginning, because Lanisha mentioned grandmothers. And Addie, in her past, her parents had died in a house fire. And so she's being raised by her grandmother, who is from Africa and Nigeria. And her grandmother sends her off to a wilderness camp. Okay, and so here's Grandma BB. There's always a way out, Grandma BB whispers. Use your mind, your heart. Her arthritic fingers poke my chest. Closing my eyes, I smell her red bush tea, the shea butter she rubs on her skin. Her spirit is alive, urgent. But Grandma BB isn't here. Here is a packed airplane. The plane is leveling off, engines murmuring steadily. 2 bells. The seatbelt sign blinks off. We're flying high. I grab my pencil and notepad from my backpack and draw. I remember the flight attendant walking the aisle, pointing at emergency exit doors. I quickly sketch row after row. I block the front exit with an X. The closest exits are ahead of me. Row 18, exits on the left and right. These are my escape doors. If the plane falls, drops to the sky, I need to rush from row 23 to row 18. I'm in the window seat. I need to get past the 2 kids sitting on my right. Should I go forward or back? If the aisle is packed, then what? Retreat to my seat, cling, swing, window shade to safety, climb over seats. What is the best path? I underline, escape 3 times.
Thank you. I felt that anxiety. I was with Addie in that moment on the plane when she's on her way to California. So, gosh, I loved this book. I read almost all of it in a day. I mean, it was just that kind of book where you just keep turning the pages. So,
thank you.
Of course. So in the afterword, you talk a little bit about this, but since most people haven't had the chance yet to read it, I was wondering if you can talk a bit about your inspiration for the book. I live out here we both live on the West Coast and have really been dealing with, extended fire seasons and wildfires, and wasn't really anything I thought about much until the last few years. And so it was really great and also harrowing to see it depicted in fiction. So can you talk about the idea behind the book?
Oh, yes. I mean, certainly climate change or drought and how it affects the proliferation of wildfires was an inspiration. I remember last summer up here in Seattle when we had all the smoke coming from California and Oregon, and I could look out my window and for days I simply could not see beyond that cloud of smoke. So that sort of fierceness of, when are we going to take care of our planet? When are we going to make it so that these wildfires aren't continuing to be problematic, and recognizing too that most wildfires are started by human activity, either a campfire not put out, somebody leads a cigarette, or they do a gender reveal party, and then the overriding fact that contributing to climate change is human fossil fuels. So that's one base. But I was out in Jackson, Wyoming at a conference, and I've gone there several times, and when I've been there, all I ever see are white people, and that's fine. But one time in the back row, there was 10 Black kids, and it was like, whoa, where did they come from, and I went over and I met them and talked with them, and they were part of a wilderness adventure camp, a program called City Kids DC, in which they funded scholarships for urban youth, children of color, to go out west. If any of you have relatives, say in Baltimore or New York or, Philadelphia, that children of color can sometimes go for days without seeing, nature in the significant way that we can in the West. And so I like the idea of having these city urban kids come out west and then have it be the time that they get trapped by a wildfire. I also have a third inspiration in that I remember Seattleites when I published my first novel, and I went to Elliott Bay. And I actually also had an event with the African American Museum. Yay! And I remember seeing the landscape of the West, and I had never seen anything like it before. And I immediately thought, that's my landscape. I could be here. I could live here. And now I do. But having been an East Coast kid, I didn't know that the West, the Pacific Northwest, that those landscapes were possible. So I also wanted to talk about how, particularly for all children, children of color, to rural children, children impoverished or whatever, the responsibility of moving them out into landscapes, because there might be places that they need to be. There might be places that call to their soul, and that there's more to this world that we have that I just wanted to share and encourage people to explore.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about it. I loved seeing Black kids in the wilderness. I don't think I've ever read a book that's done that, which is just like, I think you and I both read a lot of books, we've both written a lot of books, but to see these Black kids set in a book that's almost entire, almost the whole book is set outside in nature, it was just really shocking and really beautiful to read, and really touched me. Because I also think, I grew up in more of, I guess, a suburban environment. I grew up in the Missouri Ozarks, actually a really beautiful area that I kind of, when you live somewhere, you maybe don't appreciate it as much as you should when you're younger. And so now I'm realizing, wow, it's a really beautiful area. But I think also, even if you do grow up sort of in these more areas that do have a little bit more nature, maybe Black kids don't feel necessarily safe, right?
Yes.
Going into going on hikes or going on these things, because you get these looks. I just remember growing up and getting these looks sort of what are you doing here? And it's well, I was born here, I live here,
Yes.
we're allowed anywhere. And so it just really feels like this book is giving permission not only to the kids in it, to explore nature and really become one with it, but hopefully will really inspire other kids who are reading it to think yeah, I belong there too. This is something that I'm interested in.
Exactly. The U.S. national parks, are among our greatest resources. But in terms of minorities who visit the parks, it's under 5%. And actually, the Park Service is trying new initiatives to bring more people, more diverse people into the parks. So this whole issue of not feeling safe, I think racism has something to do with it, or not having the skills prized in the same way. You know, I honestly think it's a very complex problem, an issue for why we don't have more kids of color in the wilderness. But I know when I was growing up, we didn't even have a swimming pool in our area because we were all too poor. If you were, you know, richer and whiter, you went and learned how to swim. So I still can't swim. And so some of my kids, they can't swim. They come to a river and it's like, what are we going to do? You know, or just the idea that, you know, a bow and arrow, or, you know, if you want to go bird watching, that wasn't something that you did. But my husband, who is white, actually learned all that stuff. And so he took our kids camping, you know, and hiking and bird watching and all this kind of wonderful stuff. And I signed my daughter up for the Girl Scouts, which I think is a wonderful organization. And it was really interesting in terms of her own sense of resilience. She became more confident. And we were worried about some relatives who were experiencing a hurricane in Miami. And I heard my daughter say, well, you know what? I just slapped my baby girl to strap my baby girl to my back. She had an 18-month-old, and we would just hike out of there. And I just thought to myself, oh my goodness, all those hikes and those camping trips, they gave her a different kind of strength and survival mentality, you know, and of course she knows how to swim, you know, but yes, that why should certain landscapes in the wilderness in books particularly just be populated with white children, you know? Yes.
Yeah, no, I thought that you did it so beautifully. And then one thing I wanted to talk about from like a craft perspective is I'm curious, you know, I mean, I like nature, but I don't spend as much time in it as I should. So I get a little like feel a little challenged whenever I try to write about it. And I mean,
Yes.
it just was so natural for you. I'm curious, like, what kind of research did you have to do? Because there's so much there, you know, for like not only wilderness, but like a survival story. I mean, it got really intense where I was like, I feel like I am with these kids. And it was just really intense.
Oh, you're so sweet. You know, it's really funny. I rely a lot on imagination. I got to tell you, I don't hike as much as I should. And I'm not in nature as much as I should be because I still like my husband. He took me camping in Port Townsend, you know, which everybody knows up here, and it was the coldest night ever. It was horrible. But anyway, but it's interesting that it's sort of like, oh, in the ropes, there's a whole sequence of them doing ropes and rope tricks and all of that. I would just read, you know, books. I've never done that. And we actually had a trip for me to go out and do that this past week, but it didn't come to be. But for me, I have to dream these characters and then I let them take me where they will. And that section that I started off with, you know, that Grandma Bibi saying you have to journey, in effect, you have to journey to know where you are and to know who you are, you know, and that journeying spirit started it. And then the maps and mazes was a critical that Addie wanting to escape the fire that killed her father has haunted her entire life. So no matter where she's at, she's always thinking about survival. How do I get out of here? And she also has the gift, like the eagle, that she can see perspective, that she can see, you know, things in 3D. And there are kids that are like that they have aerial spatial reasoning. The sad thing is that a lot of that intelligence is not nurtured by our schools. So we do, in fact, have a lot of kids who are really terrific at spatial reasoning, but that's not necessarily what they're judged upon. So that sensibility of Addie, how do I escape? Now I'm in this new environment and fire creates a maze, you know, and having to learn all this stuff, it just occurred naturally. And I look up and study things. Oh, she's stuck. How would she get down? Or how do they cross the river? And I would talk to my husband a lot. And I'd imagine, you know, but a lot of this stuff, Brandy, I haven't done. I'm the author inspiring young people to do it because I am still held back from my fear. So even though I've taken like swimming lessons and all that kind of stuff, I'm still somewhat not somewhat, I'm afraid to swim. So if I go snorkeling, my husband has to hold my hand, and I have to have a life jacket, And when I go hiking with him and it starts to get dark, I start to worry, do you know our way back? So I think that if you can start at a young age to have children be comfortable in all kinds of locations, but particularly I think in our Western resource, in our Western home, that we're just making more competent, resilient, outgoing children. And also now I think with the heat from climate change, the snow melts, dying, the Amazon rainforest being deforested, the wildfires, our children are going to need to be at one with nature and the animals that nature protects, the people that nature protects. And they're going to have to help solve our way out of this problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate, and you would not know that you were able to do some of this stuff. So you did a great job there.
And it's only because I told the truth. I think sometimes people do research a lot, but I'm actually much more research imagination. So once I'm inside the character, I don't know how I can do it. It's just sort of like, it just happens and I figure it out. It's the strangest thing. It's weird.
Yeah, that's kind of how I work too, because I write about characters that know how to do a lot of stuff I don't know how to do, like surf. I'm like, absolutely not. You will not see me on a surfboard, but it's really fun to write about.
Oh, you're kidding. I thought you surfed.
Oh my gosh,
this is from the Only Black Girls in Town novel, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And because you're in Los Angeles, I made the assumption, oh, go black surfers, and Brandy must be a black surfer, but you're not.
No, not at all. I very much cheer them on too, but no, it's not me. So I love your research skills, and they really worked out well in the book.
Okay, thank you.
And then, since we are celebrating Grandparents' Day, I wanted to talk just a little bit about a couple of the adult characters in the novel that really stuck with me. So number one is Grandma Beebe, who actually we don't see, in real time on the page, but she's sort of this voice of reason, like this voice that Addie has in her head that I think gives her a lot of strength and confidence, not only because she raised her after the fire, with her parents, but like, it just seems like she gives her a sense of calm and sense of self a little bit. So can you talk about Grandma Beebe? I loved that she was a Nigerian immigrant. She was just really interesting to me.
I love Grandma Beebe too. And I think I got to her because I knew I wanted to have the symbolic imagery of a bird in the sky, And so that then led me to, what names me bird or eagle. And I got to Adago. And then Adago gets me to Nigeria, which actually Nigeria does in fact honor the eagle, but it's not the American West eagle, it's their eagle. Right. And then it got into the study of the geography of Nigeria, and they have a lot that they do to protect their parks, but also they used to have a time where the eagles would always return and the birds would come. And now because of climate change, they no longer have this festival because it stopped happening. So it just sort of made this wonderful parallel so that Beebe would be from Nigeria, but raising this American girl. But Beebe was a wilderness woman. She was a landscape eagle woman. And so even though she's in New York City, she's recognizing that her granddaughter needs to have that sense of the wild to survive, that really will fulfill her. So she encourages her to take a road that really Addie doesn't want to take. But Grandma Beebe is very much the elder that Lanisha was talking about, the woman who had paved a road and helped laid it down for the generation behind her. And so I'm always grateful to grandmothers. And if you look at my books, there is always an elder Black woman. So even in Magic City, there's a third grade school teacher who is the elder patriarch of the family, or in Ninth Ward, Mama Yaya, or in Ghost Boys, Grandma to Jerome, who gets murdered by police. And that's because when I was a little girl, my mother abandoned me when I was an infant, and my grandmother for a good period of my childhood raised me. And my grandmother gave me so many stories, gave me my storytelling tradition, gave me so much love, and she's been dead, for almost 40 years, but her presence and effect on my life and my memories of her are still there. And I honor her every day. And the thing that I like best about being where I am now, a grandmother to a four soon to be 5-year-old, is that I want to be as good a grandma as my grandmother was to me. So grandmas, I love them.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's really special. And I love that you're able to sort of honor her and, all of our elders through your characters. So
Yeah, so cool.
yeah, I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
Another character that I really love, I loved, all of them. They're all distinct, but, Leo, I think was probably maybe one of my favorites in the book, besides Addie. So can you talk about his relationship? I think Ryder, um, that beautiful Australian Shepherd, goes along with Leo, but can you talk about his relationship to Addie in the book and why that was important to her story?
One of the things that I felt that I needed was in particular to honor the city kids, who's a person, who is the adult, another kind of elder that introduces these kids to the wild. And so I immediately thought of Leo, who is a white man, who discovered in his youth that the wilderness called to him, and he made a commitment that he was going to map it. He was going to have horses and chickens and sheep and all that kind of stuff. But then he wanted to help other people discover what he had discovered and what provided so much solace in his life. So it's sort of like he throws open his camp to share. And that's how he has the wilderness adventures. And maybe for each group of 6 kids, there might be one, but an important one, that says, yeah, I'm a wilderness kid too. Or there might be then 1 or 2 others who just go back home with renewed appreciation of the wilderness, or actually, as Deshaun does, he gets into reptiles and ends up volunteering later for the zoo. The ways that all of that can touch you in different ways. And so Leo, he is a bit of a mystery, and trying to get it so that he could talk about climate change, guide and mentor Addie, but not take over as the character, it's not because he did such great teaching that Addie was able to survive. It was because Addie was Addie, and he nurtured her to still be Addie and put a name to the gifts that she already had. And he actually predicts when the wildfire happens that if anyone would survive, it would be Addie. And it comes out true. Yeah.
Yeah, I really loved that at the end, where they said that, well, you must be Addie. They said that if anyone would make it out of here, it would be you.
It would be you. Yes. Isn't
Yeah.
that great?
Yeah.
And I think, and again, I think this, but I try to write multi-ethnic worlds because I think that's the way forward for us to make sure that we honor that, so that all kids can see themselves in a book, or see communities, cross-racial, gender, religious lines coming together to make, life a better. And so, Leo is a very important character, but he's not the only character, that it's also this group of Black kids who are transformed by the experience, but they're not necessarily, saved by Leo. It's just another adult doing what adults should do for all children. Oh, let me reflect back to you your glory. Let me, say, oh, Addie, wow, that's amazing. You're amazing. And how for any child that can just mean the difference in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think, you hear, especially writing, I've mostly written YA. I've written, one book for younger readers, but you hear a lot of like, well, where are the parents in the books? And I think a lot of writers do get bogged down and don't want to put adults in their books because they think that they'll take over or they'll solve the problems. But it's really important, like you said, to make sure that they're just kind of there as for guidance, maybe like to lend an ear and provide a little bit of advice. But, I love putting adults in all of my books. I think they're interesting and, typically are a part of our lives in some way when we're growing up.
Yes.
So I really appreciated that, having that adult character who was like there as kind of a sounding board and helping her develop, her talents and her, map making skills, but didn't, like you said, take over. So
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much.
of course. Well, I have more questions for you. I don't know if we have any, I don't see any questions yet from
The
the
audience.
audience. So I'm going to keep
You
going
going?
until I see those, if that's okay with you. Yeah, I have a couple more. I don't want to spoil too much of the book, but it's a happy ending for some and a not
For
super
others.
happy ending for others. And having read a few of your books, I know you handle, you write really openly and directly about, tough topics, I guess, for kids. And I'm wondering sort of how you juggle that with telling, a realistic story, not wanting to sugarcoat it too much. Yeah, how do you kind of strike that balance?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. It's writing for youth. It's just been these last 10 years, And so my very first children's novel that I wrote was about Hurricane Katrina, because I was in
Right.
New Orleans 2 weeks after Katrina. And it's the
Oh,
same
wow.
thing, writing about how these kids and a dog survived Katrina, but having to have that moment where, hey, we need to get up on the roof, and the devastation. And I think what happened is that it came naturally to me. I wrote a lot of stories like that. And they asked me to write about 9/11, which right now there's a resurgence for my 9/11 book, Towers Falling, And then I'm on to Paradise, or I'm on to the killing of young Black boys and ghost boys. And I think it was my publisher that identified that I knew how to take disaster and turn it into triumph and empowerment for kids. And when I think about it now, I think about it, one, I've lived long enough to know that bad things happen. They are going to happen. I've had a lot of bad things happen, being kicked out of later, like my mother's home when she decided to come back and get me after I was already like getting into middle school, having like for right now, like both my parents have been dead for a long time. Both my grandparents on all sides have been dead for a long time. I am first generation college. I didn't have enough money at times to even feed myself. That I had a really hard time, and yet I learned hard times come, but you just hold on, and it gets better. Also, Mama Yaya says in Ninth Ward, she says, always eventually the universe shines down with love. That the universe is like it's not out to get you. I was gonna say, just like the pandemic. No, the pandemic is out to get us. But anyway, but things happen. And then, the 9/11, the fiscal crisis, and you have to keep moving forward. And I think that Mama Yaya character comes from my grandmother, that I think that she was such a spiritual woman that she just fundamentally always believed that things would get better. Unfortunately, Grandma, when I was writing Porch Stories, trying to honor the stories she told me, Grandma died taking care of another generation of orphaned kids. And she had a heart attack in the park, and they came to take her to the hospital. And there was one hospital across the park, which was Allegheny General, the big modern hospital. And the other one across the heart was a Catholic hospital, but it had been the first hospital to have all Black doctors. And so lots of Black doctors. And so they took her there, but the hospital was underfunded and didn't have the equipment to save her life. So literally, race affected what choice was made, and Grandma died. And I used to think Grandma was so old. How you do that? Oh,
Yeah.
so old, And actually, my grandmother died as a great grandmother at the age of 54. And I was shocked. So partly too, I feel like in terms of honoring grandma and that love and optimism and that taking care of me that she gave me and other kids, sacrificing her life for us, which no woman should be asked to do. No person should be asked to do that. But am I ever so grateful that she did? To me, it's sort of like, well, I better not be upset about anything. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, it's tough, but I'm going to make it through. I'm going to smile. The rainbow's going to come out. The universe is going to shine down with love. And as you get older, I think that's the wisdom we all are confident about. So maybe it's that sensibility. There's only one book where I did not think I would make it through to the other side. And that was Ghost Boys, writing about the murder of young Black kids and writing about the murder of Emmett Till. That novel almost destroyed me because I was a kid and I remember seeing all the images of Emmett Till and I hadn't sort of like cleared that trauma from my heart and out of my body. And then to have people like, you know, Trayvon, you know, Laquan McDonald, you know, and so many more young kids be murdered, it was just horrifying. But finally, even in that novel, I finally made it to the other side. And that healed me too of a lot of wounds. But that was the only book where I felt, you know, I can't see my way home over to a hopeful message. And I thought after I finished it that I'd never write again. And then I thought, well, if Ghost Boys is the last book I've ever written, would it have been worth it? And I decided, yes, it would have been worth it. So maybe now I've really unlocked that I know I can get kids to the other side. And I so desperately would have wanted to have books like mine when I was a kid. Somebody telling me, you can do it. You're going to be all right. You have gifts. You have strength. Believe in yourself. What you don't know, ask, you know, and be educated. And you need to be educated not only in book sense, go to school, right? But also educated in spiritual sense, you know, just warmth and doing unto others as you want them to do unto you, you know, and ultimately love wins. And the day that I stop believing that love wins, then it's all over for me. And I don't think that day is ever going to happen because I can just see the love with my granddaughter, who's going to be 5. And she said to me yesterday, Grandma, or she calls me Grandma Jewell, you love everybody. And I says, well, I love my family, but yeah, but I like everybody. I love my family the best. But I said, no, you're right. I really do love everybody. She said, yeah, you're like a dog who loves everybody. And from her perspective, she's right. And I love dogs. So you see the animals in my book, and I have 2 toy Australian sheepdogs. But yeah, that my nature is to love, and try my best not to ask for anything in return, to give. And that's because a woman named Ernestine did the same for me when I was a little girl.
Oh. Well, thank you. And I just think that's like also helpful to hear, in the context of books also, which we can pick up when we need them, but also just now with so much, it just feels really quite hopeless right now, kind of a hopeless time, with a lot of stuff going on. I just think everyone's a little bit anxious. So, I felt like, oh gosh, I really needed to hear that. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Thank you. You're very, very you just call me up anytime. Or
I know, actually, I might have to call you for some pep talk.
I would be honored by that. And also for those of you in the audience that don't know, I'm a teacher. And I love teaching. And I think I got that from my grandmother too. Though grandmother never finished the 3rd grade because she left Georgia to come up to Pittsburgh, the industrial, north then, to take care of kids, and it's amazing. But that teaching and mentoring and just helping people, that's also in my family's DNA, so yeah, call me,
yeah.
And I don't know. I just like it. I like doing it. It makes me happy.
Well, we appreciate it. We're very lucky to have that in your books, and also you're imparting your wisdom in events like this. So I did get a question that came through, and since we are just a day past the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. There's a question, could you talk a little bit about Towers Falling and what was your inspiration for that book?
Towers Falling, I did not want to write that book. That was like, again, that was the first time that my editor asked me, Jewell, you want to write this book? There are all these kids who are born, you don't know anything about it. And I told her, no, I don't want to write that book. And then I kept thinking about it, and it just wormed its way in my soul, because how do we expect kids to be critical thinkers, to be great Americans, if we don't then teach them our history? And right now, 9/11 is only taught in 14 states. It is not mandated across the nation that every kid learn about 9/11. And I have friends who actually teach young people who are going into teaching at the college level, and they run across kids who are 21, 20 years old who thought 9/11 was an accident. So I really saw that as a service, that I could talk about the country that I love, talk about from a multidisciplinary way how we can all come together. We're all connected. That 9/11 didn't happen just to one group, one state. It happened to all of us, and how the response, for the most part, was us coming together. But I find it really fascinating now that, connecting that time to what's happening now in terms of politics is really quite disappointing. That I think after 9/11, we got scared. And after, the financial crisis, after the housing crisis, that adults got scared and started scapegoating people. And that's how we ended up with the past presidency. And in Towers Falling, it's in praise of all of our documents and our fundamental values: inclusion, immigration, helping the poor, freedom of religion, democracy. So that message, I think, was really me saying to kids, don't forget the principles of what our nation was founded upon. Trust them more than you maybe might trust a politician's voice. Or maybe a better way to say it is to be critical of what people tell you what America should do and what it means, and instead use your own mind and critical thoughts to really know our history, know our founding documents, and decide what is the best way to move forward to make America greater. Yeah. And we need it more than ever. We need those kids to grow up and run our nation. I can't wait to see. There's a 5th grader somewhere who's going to be one of the great presidents of all time, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I see the kids and what they're doing already, just like Generation Z, I guess. I'm just like, oh, they've got it. I mean, not that we need to leave everything to them, but I think that they're on their way to becoming really great leaders and, speaking out about things, and they're not afraid. And I think that's really wonderful.
And also, with Towers Falling, the main character is African American. And actually, when the towers fell, it was a multinational group of people that were wounded or murdered because of that. But I do also remember that in terms of when it was happening, there was a lot of emphasis on a particular group, that were not multi-ethnic and multicultural. So I purposely put in an African American, a young white kid from the West, not the East, but who's also a Jewish kid, and then a Muslim girl who comes from Turkey, and then Miss Garcia, who's the teacher, and it's like bringing together that a reminder that America is made up of people coming from all diverse backgrounds, and that the tragedy is not exclusive to one of us, but it's all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really appreciate how you do that with your books. Well, I think we have time for just maybe one more question. I don't see any more in the chat, so I'm going to ask maybe the question that you don't want, but I'm going to ask it because we're all fans of you. So what can we look forward to from you in the future?
Okay. Well, actually, the book that I'm working on now, it's a remake of a classic novel, like hundreds of years old classic novel, and I'm not allowed to talk about it. Okay.
Okay.
The idea is that it will be a book, and then a movie. Okay.
Oh,
But just in case you don't know, Ghost Boys is being turned into a movie by Studio Entertainment, and you can find that if you Google it. And then on 2 days ago, Steph Curry announced that he's turning Black Brother into a movie with his media group Unanimous.
oh
So
my
I'm going to
gosh.
be real excited by these two movies. And I'm working on
Yeah.
a book that I can't tell you about. And I actually wrote a picture book about soul stepping, because I
Oh,
love stepping, and the
yeah.
whole thing from the HBCUs. And the book is done. I wrote it with my daughter, Kelly, but we're
Oh,
waiting for the
yay.
illustrator, who's a young woman who's finishing up undergraduate school, but she's so good that we said, we'll wait for you. And
Wow.
so the book's going to be delayed, but Soul Step is coming out, which honors all kinds of wonderful, strong Black women who went to like schools and learned how to step and rock
Yeah.
it.
Oh, I love that. I'm so excited for all of this. I missed the Black Brother news. So just congratulations on
Thank
all
you.
of this.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we got one more question in the chat, which is probably a great one to end our Q&A with. So this question says, could you talk about some of the pleasures and challenges of writing for younger kids, like, 8 to 12 years old range?
Oh, I am so glad I waited until I became older to write for kids, because I think they deserve our best. And actually, I started out wanting to write for kids. I just wrote 30 years adults for books, trying to become good enough. So I
Yeah.
think the challenge is that I know all this adult stuff and figure out how to like not sacrifice any of it, but to mush it down and make it understandable without insulting their intelligence to kids. To me, that's the greatest pleasure. And that's why I'm still talking about anti-racism. I'm still talking about the power of, like, say, Joe in Magic City, the adult, but now the child, to have an empowered I voice, to say, I can do it. I'm still talking about spirituality, gender equity. I'm still taking all the real world problems, which I think kids appreciate. Does that make any sense? Kids know what's going on in the world, and me trying to get it in a way that makes them feel it, see it, hear it, sense it. That's the other challenge. So then not to be didactic. So to keep all my layered themes, so I can write a book that maybe kids will want to read over and over again and get something new on each reading. And then also to make it so that, it sort of like has a resonance that goes inside their heart and soul, that that lost this story and they identify with it. So not being didactic, because we can stand up and talk all we want at kids, but that doesn't mean that they're going to feel it and therefore prize what you're trying to tell them. So that combination of keeping it complex, but keeping it, I got you, in empathy,
Yeah.
keeping it entertaining, that show don't tell. That's the other hard thing. That, Brandy. Shaw.
Yeah.
Yes. And you
It's
even
hard
do that in your nonfiction too, where you're allowed to tell more, but you still write it in such a way that you feel as though you've dropped us into the world and we're engaged as if we were reading a novel. I think
Thank
that's the
you.
trick. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say, like, the younger you go, I think the harder it is to write for kids. Like, I loved writing middle grade, that age, 8 to 12, but I was like, this is much harder than writing YA, and I've been trying to write a picture book for years. And it's just like, oh my gosh, this is, how can 500 words be so daunting? But yeah, and so I like that you said that about not being didactic either, because I think that's where a lot of people sort of get into trouble when they think about writing for kids. They're like, well, I have to teach them a lesson. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
no, not the way that you're thinking. You let them sort of take what they're going to take from the book, right? So
Absolutely. And you've got to let me, before we go, just give you one little bit of news. My daughter is
yes.
a writer. Her name is Kelly McWilliams. And
Mhm.
actually, if truth be told, I had nearly given up on that picture book. I was just so hard, those 500 words. And it was Kelly who said, oh, let me do the next draft. If she hadn't pulled it over the finish line, we never would have had that book together. But
Oh,
interestingly enough, Kelly writes YA.
Mhm.
And I couldn't do that if you said, Jewel, you know, you have to. I couldn't do it. And I'm doing middle grade, which she can't do. So it's really interesting. I think I'm still a kid at heart, you know, but Kelly, who is a young adult woman now, her calling is that young adult, that launching period into adulthood. So it's so, and now
Mhm.
because she's a mom, you know, picture book. So I don't know,
Right.
we just need to extend our families and do more co-authorships, or say, well, you do this and I got this, you know.
Yeah. No, I love that. Oh, that's so great.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brandy. It was a pleasure seeing you. Thank you, African
Oh
American
my
Museum
gosh.
and Elliott
Yes.
Bay. Thank you, Lanisha. Thank you, everyone. This afternoon was a joy. I appreciate
Yes.
it.
It has been so fun.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jewell Parker Rhodes and Miss Brandy Colbert. What a beautiful conversation. What a joyful and authentic and inspiring conversation. Thank you both for this conversation.
Next
Dr.
time in
Rhodes,
person.
next time in person. Yes, we are looking
Yes,
forward to
please.
that.
Yes, and actually, if we have an opportunity for Brandy Colbert when her new book comes out, when it comes out in paper, which will probably be a year from now or something like that, how about if we figure out to invite her to Seattle and maybe we can do it live and I could be the hostess for her? That would be
I would
really
love that.
great. Yeah, I'll give you my airline points or something to maybe if it's safe enough. Yeah, and then I'll get to show her around for dinner and we can both come and revisit your wonderful, wonderful, much needed, much revered museum. Because I still remember my in-person trip there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We look forward to that
Yes,
phenomenal
Brandy, you got
in-person
it.
program.
Awesome. Love you guys. Bye.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Rose, we just want to additionally thank you for that. Even when you write stories for young people, you include the wise voice of elders
Uh,
in those stories. You incorporate the voice of elders, and we thank you for that. Thank you for reminding us that grandparents are storytellers.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you have so many exciting projects coming up. Congratulations on all that's ahead for you.
And always look for that older Black woman, you know, and you can say, I know where that came from. It came, well, not just my grandmother, but my grandmother's sisters and the aunts and the women in church or whatever. And I do believe that, you know, and men can do it too. I don't want to exclude men, but I do believe the nurturing hand of a woman on a child is one of the greatest powers in the universe, you know. And so we all should remember that and lay on the hands and the love and the good word. And I'm just doing what my grandmother did for me to the next generation. But yeah, I hear you, Lanisha.
Beautiful. Thank you. And to Brandy Colbert, thank you for bringing these stories to life today as our wonderful moderator. We look forward to reading both of these books of yours when they are soon published. Thank you both.
Thank
Thank
And
you.
you.
yes,
See
and
you
on
again.
see you again. Well, on this Grandparents' Day, we honor, celebrate, salute, and thank all grandparents for the wisdom that you all share, for your guidance, and for your love. We hope that you feel our love today to you, all grandparents. We are grateful to have AARP as a partnering sponsor for today's program. Mrs. Brenda Charles Edwards is here to give remarks on behalf of AARP. She is the host of a radio program on Rainier Avenue Radio called Seniors Matter. Let us now welcome Mrs. Edwards.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I just want to say I am a volunteer for AARP Washington in Seattle, and I'm also the chapter president for the Central Area AARP Chapter 4588, one of the oldest AARP chapters in Washington State. AARP is pleased to sponsor this Grandparents' Day celebration today with the Northwest African American Museum. When I think about grandparents, I think about their innate ability to be nurturers, the keepers of family history, and the tie that binds members of family all together. Grandparents are a source of wisdom and roots for younger people. It's important to acknowledge that and to celebrate it. When generations connect, everyone benefits, spiritually, mentally, and even physically. This is what NAAM does for our community. At NAAM, they are the memory keepers, and through their programming, they strengthen and bring us all together as a community. In doing this, they show us what ties and binds us together. Our thanks to Dr. Jewell Parker Rhodes, author of Paradise on Fire, and Ms. Brandy Colbert, moderator, and all of you for being here today.
Ms. Edwards, thank you for those beautiful remarks. We thank you and AARP for your support and your leadership throughout the community. We thank Elliott Bay Book Company for the partnership today, and we salute and thank Town Hall for their involvement as well. And we welcome you all to tune in next Sunday when we are back here on NAAM's YouTube live channel, Sunday, September 19 at 3 p.m. when we will celebrate HBCU Day. Dr. Rhodes talked about the stepping that happens at HBCU. Well, we will celebrate that and so much more about the HBCU legacy next Sunday in partnership with Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Delta Upsilon Omega chapter. And be sure to tune in to our next virtual Descendants series. We will be in conversation with the great niece of Harriet Tubman. That's the great grand niece of Harriet Tubman on Sunday, October 17 at 3 p.m. right here on NAAM's YouTube live channel. And lastly, be sure to visit us at our next Knowledge is Power book giveaway pop-up. We will be distributing some of the books that were discussed during today's conversation. There is something for everyone with the Northwest African American Museum. And so we look forward to seeing you again soon. Happy Grandparents' Day to all grandparents. Thank you. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.